So these farm tours have been a really fun way for us as the EDC to start growing a better network among farmers as well and learn more about what's actually happening on the ground. And then and doing some things like talking about diversification and innovation in agriculture and what does that mean? What does it mean for our region? For us, we want to learn what that means. We have some ideas, from more of that research side of where we think or see things are headed, but we also need to be gaining input from farmers and ag stakeholders in the region to make sure that some of the ideas we have are good and they would actually be good for our region. Up here you see everything from, on the left, industrial hemp, and who knows what that's going to mean. Things like agroforestry, which are some diversified methods for intercropping with perennial crops and with your conventional or annual crops. Organic agriculture, which we're going to talk about here. And just down on the right there, Prairie Farms, an example down in Atlanta, Illinois, of an operation very diversified in specialty crops, organic vegetables and that, as well as some grains and some meat. So, looking at all the different areas, we're also interested in what it means for our region to be part of a bigger effort in Illinois, for Illinois to be a leader in agriculture and innovation in agriculture. In Greater Peoria region, we say, why not within Illinois? Why can't we be the leaders of the entire state? And things like organic agriculture, that's one example of how we can actually do that, and actually are doing that. So when we get into organic agriculture, and when we get to the panel, I'll have some folks introduce us a little bit more to what it is and why. I think going into this a little bit with an assumption of that people know what organic farming is and why maybe there's the push for it. But before we get there, I'll just share in general, organic agriculture is growing around the entire country, and as you see, these are some of the leaders in the United States in terms of acreage and crops and organic. So, Illinois, we're not exactly a leader yet when it comes to organics. There might be an advantage to that. We have some catching up to do, but as we design what organic agriculture looks like in Illinois, we kind of have a chance to learn from others' mistakes and maybe design things a little bit differently, which will get to why we're talking about supply chains and what we might be able to do differently in central Illinois to kind of redesign our own regionally based supply chains as this thing grows. Because within Illinois, as I mentioned, being leaders, we noticed last year when we took a look at the latest ag census numbers, Woodford County had the most USDA certified organic farm operations. Tazewell County was next. So a pretty big outlier too if you start to look at counties throughout the entire state. That number may seem small, but it's actually large, relatively speaking. So nationally too, this is some soybean acreage from Mercaris. So we are competitive when it comes to things like soybeans, and there's opportunity in things like soybeans. So Ryan, am I getting this correct? This is soybean imports versus domestic. I realized I got the slide from someone else, one of his colleagues, and I realized I forgot to put the label on it. But this is soybean imports versus domestic, and you'll see that there is an opportunity just in the production of organic soybeans. We'll talk a little bit more about maybe not assuming that that's just the exact answer to all this, that we should just be putting every single field into organic soybeans. It's not necessarily the right answer, but there is opportunity, and this is just one of them. I think as the EDC, one of the areas I've been focused on and in general that we talk about is building regional supply chains. And so when you start to apply that to, say, food systems or agriculture, what we're really talking about is a little bit of a redesign in how maybe the conventional approach to this. And what we're really interested in, and some of the things we've seen that can actually maybe build a little bit more regional wealth and actually start to capture more economic value within a region, is if we really started to focus in some of these tier 2 and tier 3 areas of the supply chain. So when we're talking about this, yes, we support and we love the idea of things like direct to consumer when it comes to agriculture. But that's not where we're focused. And there's also the major industry, the global industry on the top there, which is your ADMs, your Cargills, and great employers in our region. But when we're talking about growing these regional supply chains, we're really talking about this middle area where almost this missing middle that we have in ag and agriculture in the middle of how can we be doing more, building more of the supply chain to actually be located in our region? How could farmers be doing more value adding themselves, capturing more of that economic benefit? Communities, our rural communities, having facilities that do some value adding, and really start to capture more of that value within our region as opposed to simply growing it and exporting it all out. So when we started looking and thinking about organic agriculture, and we noticed that there is this pocket of farms in organic or in transition right here in central Illinois, we started to wonder, well, what's the supply chain? How do we actually, what do we do, especially as an organization like the EDC? What is our role in this? How do we work with the growers that already exist to help them bring more of their supply chain here, whether that's on the input side or on the end user side? What are the components of that supply chain? And these are things that we're still trying to understand. And the reason why we're having even this forum is for ourselves to learn what else is out there, what do we need to know about, how can we help growers and some of the other people that exist in this supply chain, and make sure we're doing the most good when it comes to actually helping to develop a supply chain. You know, we know in our region these first couple things like implements are being designed in our region already for organic agriculture. Soybeans is actually from one of Dirk's fields that he farms in Eureka, from an event you guys did last year. And then, you know, from bins to turning it into feed to turning it into poultry, the fertilizer coming off of the poultry going back into that organic system. So what else in this supply chain are we already doing that we can support and grow? What don't we have yet that we could attract to our region? That's where things like business attraction that our organization does. So we're looking for help from the existing organic community to answer these questions and be a good partner. And this kind of comes down to, in general, one of our roles at the EDC is that we can do this job of, say, value chain coordination. So as we develop these supply chains, that we're kind of getting away from maybe a more traditional, conventional approach to ag supply chains that really puts each part of the supply chain as independent and not necessarily communicating with each other. The role of a coordinator is to really make sure that from producers, from inputs to producers to those end users, that there's actually communication along that entire chain. And there's a larger dialogue about how is everybody benefiting from that supply chain? How is everybody capturing the most economic value from that supply chain and not just selling something and forgetting it, right? How do we capture more of that value add? Organizations like EDC and others can help in building these connections with that supply chain as this industry continues to emerge in our region. So that's just a little more of what I said. You know, instead of having every business work independently, that we're working on more of a cooperative model. So that being said, look at that, I made my 15-minute mark just like I thought. So when we're talking about building this organic supply chain, we put together this panel of some wonderful folks, each participating in the organic industry in their own ways. And also, what we start to see when you look at the emerging industry is a lot of these folks are already working in maybe this new model of value chain development and building new communications and new partnerships as this thing grows. So we will start with Barb. And allow Barb to introduce herself, and she has some slides as well to introduce her and her company.
You want me to talk into this? Or what do I touch? Is that right there? Okay. The side one here. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Good morning, or good afternoon. My name is Barb. I'm with All Star Trading, and I'm a feed and grain marketer. So what I do primarily is help a farmer, an organic farmer. I chose to be in the organics world about 12 years ago when I developed cancer. And I learned that the food we eat can contribute greatly to a cancer diagnosis. So once I learned that, it was like, I'm not doing that conventional thing anymore. I am primarily just marketing grains, and I know in Illinois there's a lot of organic farmers that need help with that. And you're lucky because you do have people here in Illinois who do buy a lot of organic grains, but it's always about getting the best price at the time that you want to sell. So a little bit about our company is, that's a nice little photo. Why should you trade with us, or why should you trust us? And as a farmer, it's all about trust. You know, you see your grains get loaded onto a truck, and where are they going? You don't have any money yet, so you have to kind of depend on us to be honest, and anybody that takes stuff. So we're very knowledgeable and very professional in our business world. We have logistics for you that we can do a bulk truckload, less than truckload, rail car, barge, container, and warehousing. We will trade a wide variety of ingredients, including conventional, organic, and non-GMO. And we supply a lot of ingredients for the livestock, pet food, companion animal, wild bird food, and I have a lawn care line that I work with fertilizers for the East Coast. There's value-added options. We do toting, bagging, mixing, grinding, and pelletizing. So, you know, sometimes a farmer who has animals will call and ask for, you know, where can I buy this, or where can I get the pelletized flaxseed meal? So I can usually find just about anything you want. We're certified as organic. We have been with MOSA. I'm sure you're familiar with MOSA. We've been with them probably 15 years, maybe a little bit longer. But we have grain dealer licenses in a couple states where, you know, it's mandatory to have one. And then we have memberships in a lot of the bigger organizations like the wild bird food industry. We do a lot in the Southeast Grain and Feed, California Grain and Feed, and the Organic Trade Alliance. So the next one. It's the first time I've ever used this. So we've got some nice pictures, right? So we're a one-stop shop for your ingredient needs, and this is the most important thing that I would like to let you all know, that I spend most of my day on the phone talking with farmers like yourself. You don't really have the option to know or to have the time to investigate what's happening out there. Why did the price drop? Why is the price this? What's going on with the US and with the trade war going on with China, and how is that affecting the markets? Well, I contribute on a weekly basis to several different reporting agencies like the USDA. I report to Mercaris from time to time, and also to the Jacobson. And these are nationally known publications that, you know, gather the information and then put it out into a newsletter. And because we are such a diverse company, I know what's going on, you know, with what's coming into the country. You know, like a lot of people got upset, like the 2nd of February this month, a lot of cracked corn came into the ports, the East Coast and the West Coast. So we monitor that. We know where to find that information, and then, you know, I can kind of explain to people, well, this is what's going on in the market. You know, and for you as a farmer, you want to know, well, when's the best time for me to sell? When am I going to get maximum return on my corn or my soybeans? Additionally, we pay the farmers. We pay you really, really fast. And I think that's important when you see that truck leaving, that you know that All-Star Trading is going to have a check in the mail to you within 5 days. A lot of times you're waiting 30 or 60 days for a check to come in from different companies, but we take that risk away from you. And we will pay you as long as you send me your scale ticket the day that the truck left. Then I can get that processed, and you can get a check in your hands in less than a week. I think that's really important, because a lot of times on a farm, you know, you're waiting for something, the bank note is due next month, and you want to get that corn moved so you have a check to pay for that. So I'm really sensitive to that, and as long as you give me enough time, I can get your stuff moved. Let's see. Well, I think I talked about all of that. I'm sorry, I can't read that.
Oh,
That's why I have to turn around there. Did I do that? Okay. Here we are, little birdie. So, you know, we're a family-owned operation. You know, my brother owns the company. My niece just joined. We have another guy, and his son works for us. And then my nephew's best friend works for us. So, you know, we are all working together as a family structure. I think that kind of goes along with organics. You know, organics, you got to have a family to really support you. And a lot of you, I think, have family members that are in organics just along with you, or one of you was the instigator in the family that got the rest of the family on the right path. And my cute little puppy. So again, family atmosphere, we really care about you. We're committed to getting you the best price, the best time. We also know a lot about alternative ingredients, and I get asked a lot of times, well, what should I grow this year? You know, I always grow corn, I always grow soybeans, and that's really the bread and butter of Illinois. But the other thing that we have is we have a soybean crushing plant in Joliet, Illinois. So anybody who wants to grow soybeans, I buy for their plant every day of the year. And we make a high-pro domestic soybean meal that we sell to other people who want a particular, you know, not so much in Illinois because we just don't have, you know, the dairies and the chicken places, chicken production like they do in Wisconsin and some of the surrounding states. But anybody who grows soybeans and you want a fair market price, I'm usually between, well, soybeans are going up right now. So that's the good news. Corn is going down right now. So it's a little bit of an anomaly, but you know, this only, you know, you can get maximum dollar when the facility is really close to your place. So I think that is it for me. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barb. Next we have Ryan Corey, if you want to give yourself an introduction real quick.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Corey. I'm with a company called Macaris. Essentially what we do is we are information provider for organic and non-GMO commodities. And I apologize, I don't have nearly as many pretty pictures as Barb did. I've been preparing slides for you folks today, but I think what I can bring to the table here and what I can tell you guys about is how organics look on the national level and where we see the opportunities for the organic industry with respect to that. You know, one of the big things that we talk about whenever we're talking about organics is just how significant imports are. And imports are significant. You know, if you look at corn, we're importing something like 30% of our corn supply for the organic sector, and somewhere around 75 to 80% of our soybeans. And that's an opportunity in a sense because you can start talking about, well, why don't we make those acres here? But there's other opportunities that hide within that. Part of why we do all this is because of the way feed demand is developed and where we're shipping our organic feed off to. The real opportunities that lie within that is internalizing those opportunities to feed and to produce livestock in local communities and bringing that feed demand back regional. You know, another opportunity that we see lying within organic is if you look at organic sales within the United States, we're looking at somewhere around 3% of total food sales, which is about 50% higher than it was 10 years ago. I think we're sitting somewhere around 2%, which is good. But you think about 3%, that's not a whole bunch of gain to get up to 6% or 9%. You know, you're not even talking about 10% of food sales right now. So the potential for growth in the consumer side of this market, which is really what you're talking about in organic, is the consumer side. And that's really what's driving this industry, is the perception and the demand from consumers for value-added products. You know, it's not, the market isn't where everybody wants to go to the store and buy bunny bread anymore. They want organic, whole wheat breads. They want packaged foods that have some kind of value add to them that makes them have that sense of what I'm buying just doesn't give me nutrients, it gives me some kind of intrinsic value in society at large, and it has some kind of environmental value. And that's where organics really win. So if you think about the fact that we're sitting at about 3% of total food sales, and if you talk to people in the conventional market, U.S. food sales are pretty much dead. You know, you've got inflation that drives that. We have a huge potential to really grow demand and really keep pressure on those organic premiums over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But to do that, that's going to take a little bit of soul searching, and it's going to take a little bit of thinking of how can we take and internalize that growth in demand and that value-add process back into our local community. And frankly, it's not easy because a lot of this stuff does not exist right now. The facilities that you need to deliver your grain, or the feed barns growing chickens in your local community, they don't really exist. Something as simple as organic pork. There's virtually no organic pork in the United States. You could do some very small things in terms of growth, or some very large things in terms of growth for pork that are small on the unit level that can mean a lot for growing this industry's demand. There's a lot of opportunities to get out there and to find situations where you can expand your operations beyond just adding acres, but into doing other value-add things that can really add value to your operation and grow the organic industry. There's a plaque that hangs in my brother-in-law's basement. He says, people miss an opportunity because it shows up wearing coveralls looking like work. And that's exactly where organic is right now. There's a lot of opportunities, but it looks a lot like work. But it's that work that allows farmers right now to expand and to build labor into their farms and to create farms that will last for generations. One of the things that's led to the erosion of rural communities is the fact that we've mechanized so much of our labor. It doesn't take near as many bodies to operate your average farm as it used to. Well, within organic, we have opportunities to add jobs and to add labor to our farms because we don't produce the same way that the conventional does. That feeds back into the sustainability of the local farm and can really build rural economies again and rural sustainability. So there's all kinds of positive benefits that come with organic. But it's a lot of work because there's a lot of stuff to be done. That's the opportunity and that's the challenge, and that's kind of what I'm here to talk about today.
Thank you very much. Derek Stewart is next.
Hey, good morning, guys. Good to see everybody. So my name is Derek Stewart with Stewart Family Farms. We're out of Eureka, Illinois is our home base. And I guess just a little bit about us. We are first-generation farmers, which has been kind of a fun thing to attempt to go through. I see another first-generation in the farm, or no, another first-generation farm in the room here. And so our first crop was 2016, and when we had a desire as kids. You play with your tractors in the basement, and we wanted to farm our whole lives, and our parents weren't farmers. And when we had that opportunity, we decided to jump into organics right away on the first year, which looking back was maybe a good idea, maybe not, but it was a lot of learning. So we jumped in right away, went into organics, and it was very exciting to us. Eric here is with Early Bird, and my sister-in-law worked there, and that's what kind of exposed us to the organics and introduced us to some other organic farmers. And after getting to know some of those guys, they kind of gave us a few of the things to watch out for, and so we jumped in with both feet, doing alfalfa to transition, and then soybeans and wheat for the first 24 months. And then the third year was corn that was eventually certified organic. So now we're just entering our fifth year. It's been a really fun ride. We've met a lot of neat people along the way. This photo is my brother and I, north of Roanoke, at an organic field of corn. And if you look at this field of corn, it looks really bad. But it got hit by a hailstorm, and then we had about 85% leaf defoliation. So don't try to judge the corn crop too much. My brother's here. This is a photo of us out cultivating, and I'm sure there's a lot of you guys in this room that grew up cultivating, maybe on an open cab tractor, front mount cultivator, and it probably wasn't too much fun, and the memories aren't very good. Today, on a lot of the organic farms, that tractor has guidance on it. We're taking 12 rows at a time, which is not a tremendous amount, but you can cover a field fairly quick. And that tractor does have a guidance hitch on it, which does direct that cultivator more so in the row. So it's very hard to take out crop as we're cultivating. So I don't know if the fun factor has went up, but the ease of driving it sure has. And then being first-generation farmers, you had to be creative even start farming, because trying to have people take you serious that you want to start farming was a challenge in itself. But I guess that led to a lot of creativity and making things and making sure we had the tools we need. And so this picture is this is organic corn, and we're flame weeding it, which is really old technology. I know there's a couple of guys in the room that have these, but that creativity is we built this ourselves with buying a kit of flamers and then converting this toolbar to a flamer, and I think we covered 500 acres of custom work after we built it. So it was a really good adventure and really good investment. But anyway, that's just a little bit about our farm and just kind of how we got started. This last picture here is a picture of a sign that we had designed for our farm to put at the end of our organic fields, just to kind of warn others of what we got. And these beans look really good. Maybe because I think they're bucks, but and they really are. But anyway, thank you. Oh, one last picture I forgot about. This I'll refer back to later, but if you guys notice, is there a laser pointer in here?
Yeah, the red line.
If you guys notice right here, you can see that we've got every track from this whole entire cropping season in these horseshoe loops. And there's 8 passes from planting all the way through till the combine went. So as Ryan talked about, organic farming is work. That's very true, but when we look at this, part of the technology part of organics is having that GPS, and that allows us to have 100% crop between these two. And we learned a lot in our first couple of years, and I guess this picture is kind of one of the highlights of taking everything to tram rows and having very controlled traffic in our fields. And when you look at those end rows, you see a lot of horseshoes from the air, but what you don't see is that I think the end rows went 204 on that field. And with organics, we were pretty excited about that.
Thank you, Derek. Captain Sullivan's next.
First of all, I want to thank Tori for inviting me to come here, and also want to thank all of you. You are all putting in a tremendous amount of work in the organic space, and I don't think that's to be discounted, because, you know, to wake up in the morning, as I think Ryan had said about organic shows up in coveralls and is ready to do work, it's definitely a fact, and I think you all need to be recognized for that fact. It's something that is out of the box, and I'm sure, as you know, as we mentioned earlier, Derek had said, you get some weird looks from your neighbors when you start saying you're going to do something that hasn't been done before. My background, you know, as a growing up on a very small family farm, you know, I grew up working with my dad's construction company, and they had access to a small family farm acreage early on, and my folks let us do something I would encourage any of you who have young children, and myself I'm hoping to do, is let your kids make some mistakes on your farm. Let them do the things that you might think are kind of weird and out there and oddball projects, because you just never know how those things might turn out. I got into agriculture early in the poultry projects, you know, with 4-H and FFA in 1999. As a FFA project, I started raising ringneck pheasants and built a pheasant hatchery, supplying pheasants for dog trainers, conservation groups, and for various reasons for, you know, the hunting industry. We were raising pheasants, and starting in the early 2000s, we had a pretty big web presence in the pheasant industry. Started feeling a lot of interest from people looking for pheasants for culinary purposes, and, you know, I would field those calls mostly as I'll sell you live pheasants and you figure out how to get them processed. And that in turn led eventually to, by about 2013, 2014, deciding that we needed to put together our own processing capabilities because the demand and the interest continued to grow. What's our clicker button here? Top one. Okay. In 2015, we purchased a facility. It was an existing facility in the town of Petersburg to put the project in motion to start slaughtering pheasants under USDA inspection. That's kind of when I would say we went down the USDA rabbit hole. It is definitely an area when you get into that level of government regulation, what I would call, if you ever wanted a business that there was a moat with sharks in to protect your business, it would be one that is inspected by the United States Department of Agriculture. And so that it creates its own share of challenges, but also its own share of opportunities where there's hard problems. There's typically a hard problem to solve. There's typically a market to be had. And we built this plant at early stages with the mindset that we would be doing our pheasants and then we'd be doing seasonal turkey production. As we started the project, it became obvious that there needs to be year-round production, which our seasonal market wasn't going to allow. And we needed to have a plant that could run year-round because, unfortunately, as enticing as the schedule of running a Christmas tree farm might be, running a Thanksgiving and Christmas only project wasn't going to be feasible. So we built this processing facility with the mindset that we're going to be creating products for people who have a specific need. So we built this facility that's capable of generating nearly 100,000 pounds of poultry a week if it was running at full capacity. And I guess to put that in perspective, as a corn and soybean grower, an organic grower, up to 10 million pounds of grain annually could be consumed at our facility if we were running at full capacity. Where we're at now, we have this facility. We have a need on the consumer side for the product. We need to reach growers to develop a pipeline of poultry each week to run our plant efficiently. When we built this kind of as a field, I don't want to say field of dreams, we had this idea that there was a need in the poultry space for people and businesses to create a product for themselves using the knowledge base that we would have. Whatever the species, whatever the ration, whatever the animal husbandry, whatever the slaughter techniques, we can facilitate that and then bring that product to market on their behalf. And so, it's a proof of concept that we started out doing. We had really have had very little problems finding markets for the products that we're able to create. What we need is this strong, reliable network of growers to support the growing side of those products. So that's what we really hope to accomplish here at this meeting and then the next year is to start developing those relationships to help fulfill the needs of the shackle space that we have in our plant, but at the same time helping farmers and specifically the organic growers to be able to turn their grain, ideally their own grain, into a higher dollar value product, as well as capturing the soil nutrient fertilizer capabilities that a livestock item on the farm would have. So we currently build programs, best practice programs for the white broiler markets and the halal market on the East Coast and in Chicago. We do some stuff in the specialty duck markets on the West Coast for Chinese companies for Buddha style and Confucius style, meaning, you ever think of buying a duck with its guts still inside? That's a thing. Selling game birds specifically to higher end institutional purposes. But in general, whatever that need comes down the pipeline from a customer, we have the infrastructure in place to help them figure out all of those idiosyncratic labeling claims that they might want to put on that finished product. So we have requests that are ongoing for organic and non-GMO. Again, we have a need, and so now it comes to how do we put the pipeline together to assemble that product, and that goes from the grain that's going into the bird to the growers, to getting that bird to our location, from where the birds are being grown, and then getting that finished product, to the market that is requiring them. A poultry enterprise, what's interesting from a small, and most organic farms that we've talked to and would be interested in this are smaller family run operations where increasing land requirements isn't necessary. It's just adding additional infrastructure on the farm to then help potentially recapture more of that farm's production in its own grain, and then bringing the manure back onto the farm, as a soil additive fertilizer. So another possibility too is helping individual organic farms who have some of their own, their own maybe ag tourism or other footprint to help them develop their own private label for their own farm. That's another, I think, a very good opportunity for, especially in that holiday market, where if an organic farm wanted to have their own turkey enterprise, that we could potentially help them develop a private label that they could market on their own. We've had to educate obviously people in this because it's not something, vertically integrated poultry has taken the greater part of the market share in the poultry protein space. And so sitting down with growers and explaining the process, and acknowledging the fact that we're a very young company. We started slaughtering in 2016 and have made our fair share of mistakes along the way learning this. I've looked online a couple times, for an idiot's guide to running a poultry plant, and that has yet to be published. Maybe I'll write it after we get this all figured out. So bringing this product to market, eventually we can bring to the table, into this conversation, our own growers and then the end customer, and they can bring together, because that was, as like Ryan mentioned, that the end consumer wants this interface with where their food is coming from. And creating a way for them to do that, is a lot more flexible in a system like we would be proposing than a larger integrator that would be able to service a national network would be more challenged with. Okay, what comes first, the chicken or the egg or the processing plant? It has to be the plant. If there's no plant, there's no motivation for people to put up the cost of the infrastructure to create the bird. We felt that, in a sense, it was the field of dreams. If we build it, they will come. We have the plant, we have the shackle space, we have a facility that can convert poultry into a marketable USDA labeled product. Now we need to find quality regional suppliers to fulfill the live supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. And Eric Regan.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, yeah. My name is Dirk Regan. I want to apologize to Bex and Carrie. I didn't think about what I was wearing today, and I'm not angling for a Bex shirt. I just didn't think about it. I don't sell LG anyway. But anyway, I realized that when I walked in, and I'm like, well, that was dumb. Anyway, I do a lot of those kind of things, not intentionally. So I guess my journey into the organic world is a little bit winding. Let me get off of this. This is my wife and kids. They're a big part of my life, so I put them first. So just real briefly, I went to Eureka High School, Illinois Central College, Illinois State University, and then started working for Early Bird really in 1992 with my dad. When I was still in high school, we started Leader's Edge Crop Scouting Service together through Early Bird, and I helped with that throughout all my schooling years, but went full time for them when I graduated college in '98, and just worked there for a few years until 2001, and then we moved to Indiana and spent 3 years in a children's home, which didn't have a lot to do with agriculture, but working with troubled teens for a few years, and then stayed out there from 2004 till about 2013, and managed a feed mill. And that's where I really started to get involved in not so much organics out there, but in cover cropping, because in about 2005, 6, 7, somewhere in there, the northeastern Indiana, Ohio area, cover crops became a big thing. And we were in the middle of hosting field days and selling cover crop seed, and It was just a kind of a boom out there. And in Ohio, there were some watersheds that were actually mandating cover crops at the time, if you were in a certain watershed. So some people were getting into cover crops by force, and some, most of them, I would say, were choosing to. So really enjoyed that time. But then in 2013, we moved our family to Zambia, Africa, and most of you may not know where that is. That little arrow points to it there. It's a pretty small country, but we were running a sustainable farming operation over there for a local organization here out of Gridley. And our main thing was growing strawberries. And so we took a large step back in technology farming there, and almost everything was done by hand with hose, as you can see in the lower right, I guess. And so we were growing berries, and I didn't know anything about growing strawberries, obviously, so I spent some time in California learning the strawberry industry. But what really, through this experience, kind of put me on the track of organics is, as we were growing these berries, we had some real challenges with insects, specifically spider mites. But there are a lot of other challenges in Africa, and a lot of people don't have clean water, and they don't wash their food. They should, but obviously don't always have the way to do that. So I was very hesitant to use pesticides on those strawberries, knowing that people probably weren't going to wash them anyway. And Africa is a little bit the Wild West in pesticides, in that you can get organophosphates and things that we have outlawed in the US years ago are still available and still being used there. Obviously, I was aware of those. When I saw them, I'm like, oh, haven't seen this in a long time. Wanted to stay away from those, so we started importing beneficial mites from other countries and releasing beneficial insects and doing some things like that, and slowly moved away from all pesticides. The other part of it was the soil we had was very poor. Small scale farmers had hand farmed it for years, obviously never putting anything back, and it depleted that soil completely. So when we took over that land, we had a lot of work to do to bring that soil back to life. And so that's where I started really researching what that means. And that was my first exposure to sun hemp, which you see on the left. I'd never heard of sun hemp, but I couldn't find cover crop seed in South Central Africa. So in networking and talking to people, I found this stuff called sun hemp, and I did find some cowpeas, and planted it, and just couldn't believe what it did. This plant was huge. The big yellow flowers, I didn't even realize at first it was a legume of any kind, but it attracted a lot of bees, and we needed bees for pollination. And so I ended up using it as a cover crop and then planting it as a buffer around all my fields to attract bees and beneficial insects. So through the years I was there, we kind of developed kind of a natural, there's no certified organic there, and honestly people don't pay for organic, it's not even a thing. But we chose to go down that path for food safety. So we kind of turned the farm in that. The other angle to that was the upper right picture, I think, is some maize or corn. And most people are subsistence farmers trying to grow enough to live on. And so I realized that some of my workers were growing corn, and they were getting 10 to 15 bushels per acre yield. And they were planting DeKalb seed corn. So they had it in little bags. They sell everything little there. And so I'm like, I know this is pretty good corn, I'm assuming, but their yields were just atrocious, obviously. And it was partly how they were planting and how they were managing that. So we started a vocational program to teach them how to grow corn with, by hand. So what you see in that picture, we had small plots of ground that we grew on. I'm saying they're only 30 or maybe 50 feet by 50 feet, very small. But where we were showing them is how you space it. They were still planting corn in mounds, 3 seeds per mound. When all 3 seeds grew, instead of removing 1 or 2, they let them all 3 grow. So 3 equals 0. And I was trying to show them how 1 seed, 1 seed, 1 seed spaced properly equals a lot. And we were harvesting there by hand, and the people couldn't believe the size of the ears. And basically what we wanted to demonstrate is you can grow more on less land. The hand water, everything's by hand. So instead of growing 2 acres and doing it poorly, we really wanted to teach them to grow small. So that was a really exciting part of it, but I wasn't there to see it all the way through. It's still going, I think. But and then when I came back in 2018, there had been a huge shift from when I left in 2001. There were only a handful of organic farms, very small. It wasn't a thing at all. And then when I looked at coming back, I talked to Early Bird and they said, hey, we need somebody. The organic thing's grown. We don't have the staffing to deal with it. And I said, well, I am highly interested. So I really enjoyed getting to know the organic industry again, or really for the first time, and really impressed with what's going on in the area, the attention people are giving to details and doing it well. And so it's been just a huge joy to learn. I'm still just a baby in all this. I don't claim to be any kind of expert, but just using what I learned a little bit overseas and what these local producers and people have taught me, it's been a real blessing to work with. So that's all for that.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, we'll move into a discussion. Just so you all know, we'll guide this for a bit just with some questions, but we do want to get to, leaving ample time for Q&A, and then also leaving some time at the end just for people to mingle and network, because I think there's a lot of people in here that just might want to meet and talk and maybe find some new partnerships. I wanted to start off by, like I said earlier, maybe giving, and maybe Derek, you're the best to kick this off, but could you just give us an overview of the defining differences between organic and conventional, both on the production side and on that marketing side?
You bet. So our farm is a parallel operation, which is organic and conventional. And there's a lot of producers in this room, but if you're not a producer, I guess the easiest way that we explain it to people is in our conventional acres, we can plant, we can spray, and we can harvest, and then do some tillage around that, and that would be farming in a nutshell. On the organic side, there is no herbicide, not really insecticides. So in order to control weed pressure and insects, we moved to a rotation that's at least 3 crops, sometimes 4 crop rotation. The main one being beans, wheat, and then corn. There's a few other crops to grow in there. And the rotation really breaks down the cycles of the insects and whatnot. And then the amount of passes, as we talked about that picture up there earlier about the cornfield with controlled traffic, in the organic, and maybe some of the producers have a different idea, but I always say for every acre that we're farming organically, it's like 4 times the work of what a conventional acre would be. And some guys might argue it's 8, some guys might argue it's 3, but it is a lot more work on the production side. But marketing-wise, unless Mercaris has another option here, conventionally, we can sit here on our phones and we can check the CBOT or the local elevator, and we can check pricing within 10 minutes throughout the day as the markets are open. And in the organics, typically it's making phone calls, calling Barb. I called her a couple weeks ago to check on an oat price, and calling other people that would either help sell that grain or be a direct processor like a feed mill. And so the organics is, I always call it closed door marketing, where there's not, you can't really log in and just check prices. There's a few that are starting to do that. Maybe you guys have some of those opportunities, but I would say those are the differences.
So then, just a little bit of why then, what in the big picture, what are some of the advantages of getting into it, given that it is more labor intensive and there's still a lot of gaps to fill in terms of that marketing side?
Going back to what Ryan said earlier this morning about work and overalls as an opportunity, and with that 8 passes, that kind of cuts into the family vacation time in the summer, because you're out there just relentlessly working and walking beans, and there really isn't a summer lull. We feel like we get out of the cultivating tractor and we're done walking beans, and then 3 weeks later we're combining. So there's just not my wife always says when we started organic farming, she sees me before planting and then after harvest, and we're just you're just in motion all the time. So there is opportunity with that, though. There are more gross dollars per acre. Your return is higher, but your input on the hours and the passes are historically going to take more effort.
Barb, maybe you can help me answer the question a little bit more on the market side, the difference between conventional and organic, and some things I've heard recently of even that organic is maybe has been insulated a bit from things like the trade war. Why might that be? What are the advantages?
Well, the first thing I like to say is when I first started in this feed ingredient business, one of the guys that I worked with used to manage a mill somewhere out near Mendota, Illinois, and he always said, organics, it's never going to be as big as conventional because, the U.S., we feed the world. So I was like, okay, so we feed the world, but organics seems to have a foothold here and it's growing, and India can now feed itself. I don't know about China. I hate to talk about China with what's going on over there, but I know that India has bought many, many acres, or in Africa is going to be the new provider of organic crops. There are major investments going on in that country of Africa, and lots of land for them to start growing organic. So in terms of this, of what's going on in the trade wars, we import a lot of, as a country, we import a lot of soybeans, because we don't produce enough for the demand here. So that's just like a given in the market. So we're dependent as an organic community to buy these grains and import them. However, in the past, the National Organic Program and our USDA has not been protecting us from fraudulent crops being brought in. I think that page has been turned, and we know that that all those big containers that were coming into the country of fraudulent corn a couple of years ago have been, that's been in the news, and the customs people and the NOP are working diligently to keep that from happening again. We know that this Randy, I don't know if this is answering the question, but I have a point to be made here. Randy Constant was a farmer that just recently was federally indicted and found guilty of selling millions of tons of grain fraudulently, mostly to the California market, and then he killed himself after he was found guilty. And most recently, it was in the news that a man in Spearfish, South Dakota, by the name of Kent Anderson, who was fraudulently selling he was claiming that linseed meal from an ADM plant in Mankato, Minnesota, was being sold as organic. And what he would do, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, well, no, I'm kind of proud of the fact that I was able to turn this guy in, but I couldn't talk about it because it was an FBI investigation. But what was happening is I would have a trucker pick up my load of organic flax meal and bring it to my customers. And he called me one day in January and said, Barb, my conscience has gotten the best of me, and I need to tell you this. But I went into the facility with my load of linseed meal from ADM, and the guy's name was Bill. I'd love to know who that guy was. He took my paperwork that said that it was from ADM, and he handed me back new paperwork that said this was certified organic flax meal. And then he took it and delivered it to my customer. So I asked him, well, how many times did you do that before you told me? He said 3 times. But in the industry, everybody kind of knew that was getting this cheaper meal. They kind of suspected that it wasn't maybe totally legit. Well, we didn't know about it, and then I turned them into the NOP immediately, because as a company, we cannot afford, as a company, to tolerate this type of activity on any of our customers or our vendors. So I remember I turned them in with all of our paperwork about 4 years ago to the NOP, this woman named Judith. And then 2 years later, the FBI called us and wanted some more paperwork. And then last week, or 2 weeks ago, it was in the newspaper that he was federally indicted for money laundering and selling fraudulent grains to the tune of $71 million. So here we have three big fraudulent things that are going on in this industry, and finally the NOP and the USDA are waking up and saying, okay, this is big business now, and we have to make sure that what we say is organic truly is. So, everybody complains about when your certifier comes and you gotta jump through all the hoops that they want you to, and for us, it's a paper trail. So, but I don't know if that answered the question that I was supposed to answer, but I wanted you to know that I feel that the integrity of organics is really number one. It's really the most important thing. And you as farmers, you're the ones that are responsible for making sure that everything that you say is organic. And I appreciate that. And so do the consumers out there who eventually buy your grains or make them into, cornmeal or flour or soybean meal that our animals eat.
Before we moved off of maybe the why organics question, I just have one more comment and question, probably for Eric. But in the last couple of years, I've been really inspired by groups like Regenerate Illinois, and we actually hear a lot now, especially the last year, terms like regenerative agriculture. And when I talked with folks at Regenerate Illinois, that when we talk about organics and numerous other farming practices that can fall under the umbrella of regenerative, that it's not only about this end product and a product that maybe has a greater value in the market, right? That there's a lot of other things to consider in terms of how farming impacts the soil and soil health, how farming impacts communities, right? And its ability to build up communities. I often use the example of Jamie's farm out in Iroquois County, where he's grown organic grain, but also in a small town. He's repurposed what was a derelict building and turned it into a mill, and has a pretty cool milling operation out of East Central Illinois that's employed some people and is providing a value add for numerous farmers, right? So there's more to it than just getting another crop to throw out on the market. Eric, I've met you through some of those groups and conversations too. What else about organic farming is valuable, and how does it fall under that umbrella of regenerative agriculture?
Sure. I think there are, since I've come back, there are these words tossed around, sustainable, regenerative, whatever. The word regenerate means to restore to a better state. So that in and of itself says that there's something that's degraded. And I think there's little argument that our soils are degraded from what they were. There's been enough stories about fence rows that were torn out and the difference people see from that undisturbed soil from a long time ago. So I think it's more important than it gets credit for in a lot of ways, and I think there's sometimes fear of that a little bit, which doesn't make a lot of sense, except that it means the big C word, and that's change. And that sometimes there's some fear around change sometimes, but I think the organic system, being a systems-based approach, naturally tends toward regenerative farming. So whether you see yourself as a regenerative farming or not, the organic system naturally tends that way. I think it's important, if I were an organic farmer, that soil regeneration would be a very important part. It's not all about the economics. Yes, it pays better, there's no question. If the economics weren't there for organic farming, if you were getting $5 a bushel for your corn or $4.50, would you still do it? Would you do it just for the soil benefits? Those are questions that I would be asking myself. And so I think it's important. So pieces of that you've probably heard at different meetings and things, using your manures, which in our area, being very manure deficient that we are, the chicken manure is the base of our fertility here. It just is. We don't have a lot of other options. So, but it's a fairly good product. And the use of cover crops, which I think could be used more, but we have challenges with cover crops, either getting them in a timely manner or getting them terminated. So I think there's more work to be done. I think the organic farmers I work with, most of them are open to finding ways to make these things work better. Whether it's switching up the way they do things, they're much more open to change. And the other note I would make, right there. Oh yeah, so I'm kind of in this weird place sometimes where I'm working mostly with organic producers, but I'm in a business that mostly works with conventional farming, and that's the reality of that. And so I have a lot of passion for soil building. I've seen the degraded part of soil to the point where it almost won't grow anything anymore. I've experienced that firsthand on a small scale, but I also look around and I think we are very blessed with good soil. It might be too good, and I think that's why some of these things are slow to catch on. And I feel like there's a lot of resistance in the conventional farming world to these things. And so I think it's very important that as organic farmers, number one, you're doing a great job. Number two, you may be leading the way in showing how these things are valuable in every farming system, not just organics. And I think you guys are going to lead the charge in that, at least in this area, of showing the community and the rest of the farming community that these things work and they're important. And I know I was just struck last spring with all the rain we had. And I was seriously disturbed and saddened by all the soil I saw in the ditches and running out of fields. And I'm just like, how do you put a value on that? And I think it's very valuable. So I think regenerative agriculture is not a fringe thing. It never was. But I think it's been viewed that way for too long. And I think there needs to be a waking up to these principles. So it's my opinion anyway.
And I'll just use that as a launchpad, a question just for whoever, multiple people answer, but given maybe this idealized regenerative as a framework of this is a economically valuable crop, this is something that's preserving our natural resources, and it's also something that's maybe an opportunity to rebuild our communities as well, and provide new businesses that are maybe tied to organic farming. We're growing lots of it, right? And more to come. What does a regional supply chain look like for organic farming in our region?
You know, if you're talking about a regional supply chain, I think a part of what that leaves out is regional demand. And what you're talking about really is going from that first input to that end consumer and building that entire chain. And you know, a lot of it is like what Kevin has talked about there. It's small steps to start. You start off by, all right, I'm going to do this as an experiment. This worked, I'm going to build on a little bit. This worked, I'm going to build on a little bit. And if you look at kind of where organic is specifically, you know, a lot of it is set up right now where there's a lot of grower contracts, a lot of forward contracting. So essentially your crop's sold before it's ever in the ground. And that's a great way to start. But as you get used to organic farming and get your approach down, and you start to get your rotation the way you want, and you start to have good results on your yield, you can start to experiment. And you start to do incremental things like, okay, well this year I'm going to pick up a few hogs, I'm going to feed them out. I'm going to see if I can find someone here local that can buy my pigs off of me. Or maybe what you do is you want to try and grow food grade. All right, I'm going to find a food grade buyer instead of growing feed grade this year. I'm going to take a few of my acres, I'm going to put in some food grade corn, some food grade beans. And you start small and you experiment. And you start to find markets locally that can take what you're doing and they can sell it into local markets. It's really about keeping that local. And a lot of that might seem a little bit daft given the way that most everything goes anymore. But you know, I liken it to the craft beer movement in a sense, because you know, if you would have gone back to 1986 and said within the next 25 years there's going to be 3 or 4 breweries in every major town, and macro, the big guys are gonna be hurt, they're gonna lose the business trying to snap those people up because everybody wants to drink the beer that's made in their local town. I said, you're crazy. That's what happened. You have people who saw an opportunity to come in and build something small and experiment and find local consumers. And a lot of these folks, they've partnered with local growers. They source their grain locally. And they've built these little microcosms of an economy to support local consumption and local production and keep that revenue and that income local. So really, it's kind of a two-based thing. You know, you start off by getting your methodology down and getting your crop rotation and getting your technique down as an organic farmer. And then you start to experiment. And you find other people around you who are willing to experiment. And you find things that work through the experimentation, and you build from it. You keep going forward. You know, there isn't one thing that you can go out, you know, that's that opportunity and the challenge, right? There's not a book you can go buy or a business plan you can go down or a template you can get offline that tells you these are the steps to do it. It's experimentation and small experimentation, then finding what works and building from that. But it really is putting that whole chain together, consumer to producer, and keeping that chain in the local economy.
Derek, I don't know if you had anything to add. I mean, I had a question just for you written down, tied to that a bit of, you know, for you guys farming, what's that trajectory look like for you, and what do you guys see some of those next steps as a grower? What could you use, or what would you like to go after?
Yeah, so from just the grower side and taking the feed grade market specifically, you know, a value add in our area that would really be beneficial to us to help kind of complete that chain. You know, right now we're hauling in, before the crop is grown, we're hauling in a lot of our manure from either out of state or areas that are fairly far away. We grow our grain here in Woodford County, or the local counties, and then into the season it gets shipped off, usually out of state or somewhere far away. So if there was you know, a poultry operation like Cabin that we could deliver grain to and get manure back and kind of make that circle complete here more locally versus, you know, the nearest 3 states, I guess.
Kevin, you have thoughts on that? Or, you know, how do we build even just that starting point supply chain for poultry?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the starting point on a lot of this stuff, and I'm glad Eric brought up about experimentation and how things have to look. I played football with a guy who had long blonde hair to the middle of his back, and he looked like a big Viking. And I asked, how did you grow your hair that long? He goes, you have to be willing to look like an idiot with shoulder length hair for a long time. And, you know, I think about that in how we set out to do this, that there isn't an exact recipe to do this, but it is taking small bites of it and taking each of those small bites and saying, first of all, how many total acres of organic grain are we trying to grow? What is being brought in currently? Like how much total tonnage of fertilizer are we bringing into this area? I mean, is that a number that's been quantified that we can have access to? And this is a fairly generalized statement because there's a lot that goes into figuring soil nutrients and the fertilizer value of litter, but just on a kind of a back of the envelope, just something to have in your head. Litter from about 1,000 broilers will fertilize approximately an acre of corn ground. So, you know, in just as a metric, you know, if there's, I mean, Tori, do we have a handle on, you know, what kind of organic acreage there would be, or how many acres of organic corn are being grown in Woodford County in your region in a season?
We've been trying to narrow that number down. We've been talking with Macaris for a bit. It's hard to get to those numbers.
Yeah,
Counties are.
I mean, is it 10,000 acres? Is it 1,000 acres? I mean, is there a ballpark?
It's got to be less than 10,000.
Okay.
9?
Yeah, probably less than. I think there's only about 40,000 acres in all of Illinois of field crop organic, so it's probably smaller than that.
Yeah, we could probably come up with.
So just as a starting point, we need to be able to answer certain questions about that, because if we're looking at a regional supply chain, we would want to understand what's the market. You know, is there a market that justifies what kind of infrastructure, and you know, what is that input that's being brought in at this point? So, yeah, I mean, I think this is something that's timely, especially with the cost of trucking going up and the requirements for trucking. having regional supply is vastly important. As a poultry grower, when I see litter coming in, I love seeing organic farms going in, which is fantastic. I feel it's in the right direction. But when a truck carrying poultry litter from a layer house in Wisconsin is being dumped across the road from my hatchery, I have nerve fits about what they might be bringing into our area, and if we were able to supply more of that in a world where the reality of biosecurity really has to be a part of the conversation. You're insulating your regional supply chain from outside inputs that are outside contaminants, let's say, that can cause problems. So yeah, I agree. We need to take small pieces of the question, answer those, and then pair those with what resources and infrastructure are currently available and then leverage those correctly.
And if I could add another thing that, as organic producers or any farmer really, one of maybe problems, not a fair term, but that's the best word I can think of. Problems with conventional agriculture right now is the vertical integration. And the fact that your upstream demand channels keep getting smaller and smaller. They're getting to be bigger players, but there's fewer of them. But there's some lessons to be learned in vertical integration. And I think some of those lessons can be taken back into our own operations. So for example, I have a friend who farms out of central Missouri. He's got about 2,000 acres of corn soy. He's a conventional farmer, but he's still a good guy. But so they experimented, they added turkeys. And so turkeys were successful, and they added a feed mill. And so now they are vertically integrated. They grow field crops. They can take that crop, they can sell on the market, or they can sell it to their feed mill, depending on what they think is going to make them the most money. They run each three as an independent operation. Then they take the feed that they get out of the feed mill. They can sell it to the turkey operation, or they can sell it out to the market. And they can also do custom blends. Then they can take the turkeys, and they sell the turkeys up chain. So they're taking 3 different points of value add in the ag economy, and they've vertically integrated those into their operation. So there are lessons to be learned from how the big guys got big that can be applied to your operation that will help you bring in those revenues and those value add opportunities that are lost by just selling off your grain. I think of it a little bit like the cattle industry, the cattle industry, where you take feeder cattle, right? And you grow them out on grass and then you sell them off to a feedlot. You talk to somebody who does those feeder operations, basically they're talking about selling the grass. Do I sell the grass on hoof or sell it as a bale? What's going to give me the most money? I think thinking about our grain in the same way is a very positive and productive way of thinking about our operations. Do I sell my grain by the bushel or do I sell it on the hoof? And I think there's opportunities in thinking about vertical integration and thinking about how we market our grain that allow us to bring those values back in.
Without getting too much into the weeds on it, I'm interested in that litter and what, for organic farming, are there certain specifications for litter? Does your poultry already need to be organic to use that litter in an organic operation?
As far as I understand it, no. The manure coming onto organic farms does not need to be from organic livestock. It doesn't need to have any certifications, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that has been a requirement for most certifying bodies. There's a whole lot of obviously analyzing that needs to go into a sample of litter to understand how much wood chips is it, what was the carbon base that you were using, whether it's rice hulls or wood chips or some other medium. But the need, I guess the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium that's coming from that litter has both long and short term advantages. Not even just to organic, to conventional agriculture. Can find value in that, especially if the cost of transportation, which is a huge cost of bringing litter as a soil amendment onto a farm, is. So I think there are values beyond just the organic need for the fertilizer. I know there's many more experts beyond my knowledge base on this, but some of the layer houses that don't use litter, that are cage systems, that they're capturing manure in its liquid form, dehydrating it, turning it into a pellet, things that can be applied more readily. The way I'm proposing it, the way we spread the small amount of manure we do is whole dry litter with some cake that's been chopped up in it. You have some of the sawdust, you have just the poultry litter, you've got some straw, but there are more refined products that are out there. So one of the questions is, am I using this on my own farm, and is it more advantageous to spread my own fertilizer on my own acreage, or is this a value add item that can be turned into a pelletized poultry manure additive for soil? That's another step in the processing, which adds cost but adds value in a way to that product too. So again, it's what infrastructure you have at your disposal, and if you have a market that's willing to pay a premium for those extra steps. Because one of the things I think really is, as we talk about vertical integration, and I'm guilty of this myself on our own operation, and I'm sure many of you have, is that there's tendency when we think, okay, let's vertically integrate. Let's become the grain supplier and the customer for our grain and the elevator and the processor of livestock, that one operation starts subsidizing the next one, starts subsidizing the next one, starts subsidizing the next one. And so if we are going to go to that integrated step of adding these other pieces to the puzzle, that each one of them is able to stand on their own 2 feet, because national cattle numbers Kansas State puts out for to maintain a cow in 2018 was somewhere around $900 true cost in maintaining grazing land, and that's figuring your pickup truck and your tractors appropriately into the operation and your own and all of the parts of it. But you ask an average cow-calf guy, all the tractors used for the rest of this operation, and it really doesn't count for the cow operation. My truck, I had to have anyways because I'm going to do this. So if we're going to have these additional enterprises, it's just vastly important that they're standing on their own, that they're just not a byproduct of, well, I get this for cheap, and I can do this for even cheaper, and I can do that for even cheaper. That's not the idea. The whole idea is to capture more value for doing all the extra work. It's not just being able to say, I started a machine that is working, but it's not creating any additional value than if I was just selling, at the end of the day, conventional corn to the elevator, and I was getting more money at the end of it than I am today. Then that really has to be something you ask yourself. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but just more thoughts that I've had.
That's good. I wanted to talk a little bit too, just about the crop opportunities themselves, and potential just for what are the diversification opportunities in that. Ryan, we had talked a bit about soybeans. We talked about how much is being imported, and why not just start growing all of that soy here? What are maybe some of the upsides and downsides to just more soy? What other crop opportunities are, Barb, and you can chime in too, because I know we talked about some of those other crop options.
That's so whenever you look at those trade numbers, it's almost a misleading opportunity, because you look at how much soybeans we're importing. We're importing somewhere around 75% of our organic soybean needs. And you think, wow, that's a lot of acreage we could be making here in the United States. That's sort of true, except for if you talk to anybody who farms organic and ask them if they want to triple their organic soybean acres, they'll say no. There's some serious consequences that come, and serious ramifications for an organic rotation that result from trying to grow that many soybean acres. And that's one of the differences between organic and conventional. You can't just look at that market price signal and decide, this year I'm doing corn, this year I'm doing soy, whatever's going to bring me the most bang for my buck. You're thinking 3 or 4 years down the road based on your rotation. So whenever you look at that import gap, it's not so much how do we fill it by growing more soy, it's how can we fill it by factoring in some of our rotational grains that we already need to grow. Things that can come in and fill that protein ration within, because a lot of times we're talking about there is poultry by and large. How can we grow crops that can fill that protein need within that feed ration for poultry that fit within our rotational profile. And it's a real hard question, because a lot of it comes back around to where your point of demand is for that soybean, which it's largely on the East Coast, not in the Northeast, where your large organic poultry producers are. But it's not impossible to make low soy or non-soy poultry rations. They do exist, we used to do it. It's just not the most economically efficient way of feeding chickens. But organic isn't about doing the most economically efficient thing. It's about doing what is sustainable and what works in the long run, what builds the overall integrity and sustainability of farms in the U.S. So specifically, which crops should go in there? You could probably put some more peas in there. You could probably do some more sunflower in that mix. You would have to talk to somebody who's a animal feed specialist to give you a better sense of what that looks like. But I can tell you, just looking at the numbers, you can't fix the import situation with soybeans. That's not the opportunity. The opportunity is what crops can we do in our rotation that can be substituted in for those soybeans.
And it was interesting this year that the imported soybean meal price was the same as what we could produce domestically here in the Midwest. So that kind of helped our organic community a lot, because we didn't import a lot of the soybean meal that we had in the past to fulfill these orders. So now what happened is we had a season that was very wet. So the organic acres that grew soybeans this year had very low yields, particularly here in Illinois. So here we are, where we finally get to where, our domestically made bean meal is the same price as what we can buy imported, and now we don't have any soybeans. So I predict that soybean prices have gone up a little bit this year, and they probably will continue through until the crop, which means that the soybean or the domestic soybean meal will be priced very similar to the imports. And India had a bad summer, or bad season, so that's why their prices went up a little bit higher. So, it's all the economics of the world taking place. But like Brian was saying, I'm not an agronomist or a nutritionist, but I know that a lot of the East Coast people have been making eggs that are soy-free eggs. And Whole Foods does a really good job of contracting with local farmers to buy eggs or chicken meat, so, and plus we're so close to Chicago, there's got to be a lot more opportunity for any of you that are farming here, that your crops or your animals or whatever, or even your vegetables, go right straight up to Chicago. They're less than 100 miles away. It's a pretty big opportunity in my opinion. So,
Barb, I have a question for you actually. With your comments about the honesty of the integrity of the supply chain, where there have been some bad players that you mentioned early on, and there's this large amount of foreign material coming in. What oversight is there to protect the growers here from a competitor in India that may not be a nefarious player?
Oh, thanks for asking me, because I did want to address that. So, the president of our company traveled. At one time, we were importing a lot from China, but because of the trade wars, that's not happening. So, the president of our company, about 7 or 8 years ago, went to the farm that we import our organic soybean meal from, and he was shown the royal treatment, but he got to see how these beans are raised in India. Now, we've had a relationship with these people for over 10 years, and it wasn't until just maybe within the last 5 years that they got the InstaPro, which is the American-made soybean extruders, into India. And basically, there are little tiny farms that are maybe as big as the ones that you talked about, that are managed by a big corporation, and these Indian farmers will get a plot of land, and all those soybeans are hand-picked and put into burlap bags, and that's how they're farmed. So when our president went over there, he wanted to see exactly how this was going, because you always hear things about the Asian culture. It's all about what can you do for me, and how much is that gonna cost me, and that sort of thing. But, so then when we would buy a container, we have a sample for every container sent to Midwest Labs or whoever we're using. So we have an analysis of every single container that comes into the country. So, and that's available for any of my customers to see. So we know what the protein level is. We test it for the urease and KOH for the birds, because that was a big issue before they used the InstaPro machines. They burn it, you know, or they get it, it just wasn't working correctly, and we didn't get those correct factors. So that's the, you know, I don't know about other companies that do that, but that's what we do. And we don't sell a container of soybean meal unless we have a test on it. So we know that it's good, and we wouldn't sell it if it wasn't, so.
Yeah, and I can add to that, you know, for domestic stuff, the NOP has a lot more room to come in and look around what's going on. They've got a better boots on the ground type of a situation. But when it comes to the imports, other than the paper trail, the NOP doesn't really have much authority to go in and look at imports. You know, they can't go into the shipyards and crawl into a container and take a sample and see what it is. They have the paperwork. That's really all they can look at. And that's not their fault. That's just the way the regulations are set up. And they can only do so much overseas because they've only got so much of a budget. So their hands are a little bit tied when it comes to the foreign fraudulent situation. They, you know, I'll defend them and I'll say they do their best. They don't have enough resources to handle the import situation, especially at the scale. So it is really important, really good to hear folks like All Star and Barb who do their due diligence to make sure that what's coming in is not fraudulent. Because at the end of the day, the USDA, about all they can do is look at the paperwork and go to someone and say, hey, this paperwork, it doesn't seem to add up. That looks like that might not be organic. The company can go, huh, yeah, I don't know about that. Conversation's done. It's completely on that company to verify whether or not what's coming in is organic. The NOP can do very little in terms of imports to just verify what's going on.
So I got a question about that. So, you know, these imports are coming up and down the river on barges, okay, and I'm witnessing this with the transportation. They're bringing this stuff up and down the river. These guys are working through a broker to bring these beans or the corn up. The truck comes to me, you know, or I hire a trucker that's hauling this. He's hauling my stuff off the farm. I say, well, you gotta power wash this truck. You gotta clean the tarps. We gotta make sure this thing is perfect. And he says, well, I've been hauling up the river all week. We haven't done anything. You know, we didn't do anything before, you know, they didn't want to have it clean. So the question is, they're bringing this stuff up the river, and they're paying this broker, or, you know, the money's probably changed hands. Okay, so there's a double standard here. They've got this imported stuff. They're going to take it no matter what it is. And what the, you know, if they're not testing it. But my stuff off the farm, oh yeah, they're testing that. You know, how do we get around that?
Do you want to first crack?
I'll just say one thing. All I know is that the containers that we have, they're
Containers.
Are these containers on the barge?
No, these are barges.
Okay, well, I know that when we buy by the container, and there's a plastic liner in there.
Right.
But I don't know about the barges. Maybe you can speak to that. And I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, you know, there's not a good answer to that. My genuine sense is, for the most part, the people who are bringing stuff up the river are doing the legwork and doing what they're supposed to. I'm not going to say everybody. I'm not going to name names because I'm not here to make enemies. But I do genuinely believe most people who are importing want to verify it's organic. And the reason that they want to make sure that it's actually verified organic is that what they want to do is they want to sell chicken at $4 or $5 a pound. They'll pay the premium for organic because what they want to do is sell the chicken. And it does them a lot more damage as a company to have their reputation tarnished than paying more for organic. For example, the flax situation that just happened, First of all, I can't believe they didn't figure out the fraudulent flax thing faster, because we don't make that much flax and canola in the US. The volume's just,
It was incredible. Yeah.
just do some math. I got distracted there. But the point being that it was $71 million or something to that. That's really small peanuts. It's not that much in terms of the supply in the US. It didn't hurt organic that much from the supply side. Where it hurts is the perception. And it hurts that consumer side that we really need. The fact that people believe in organic and believe that they're getting what they're paying for when they pay that premium. And most of the people who are doing the large volume of imports, they're just as sensitive to that perception as anybody else. Not saying everybody, and I'm not naming names, but most of them are. So there is actually a fair amount of due diligence on the import side. You know, the places that we used to get most of our problematic imports from, we don't import that much from them anymore. You know, the Black Sea used to be a major deal, and we just, frankly, we don't import that much from the Black Sea anymore. Now it's Argentina and it's India. That's who we get most of our imports from. So they've reworked their supply chains to get out of that problematic area so that they can have that integrity. Not everybody, but most. For those who are not, the sad reality is you got to be your own police. You know, if you don't feel comfortable putting your stuff on there, don't put your stuff in there. I was talking to a guy at a conference I was at last week, and the boy drove up in his truck to take his grain. He didn't have his clean out slip. He's like, oh, I promise I cleaned it out. I said, where's your slip? Oh, I forgot it back at the office. It's like, all right, open it up. He got in there, he took his mallet. He said he banged about 6 buckets worth of corn out of there, and then he went and he power washed it. He cleaned it out himself before he put it in there because he did not want to risk having any kind of contamination in there. You got to be your own police. And if you don't feel safe doing it, don't do it. It's, like I said, it's a lot more work to do it this way. But that work is what gives you $9 corn and gives you $20 soybeans.
Before we turn it over to Q&A and get other folks involved, I wanted to just kind of ask one more question about building that supply chain, and maybe fostering a regional supply chain is a way to get around some of these issues that are created by importing things. I wanted to ask, and whoever wants to answer, in terms of actual businesses that work in this supply chain on either side of production, those inputs, and then also where it's being sold to in those end products. What are, first of all, what are maybe some businesses, and this will be something for the audience as well, what are some of those businesses that maybe already exist in our region that we should all know about to help support and grow, that are either providing some sort of critical input into the organic industry, and on the other side, more on that marketing side, who's purchasing this, who's using it. If they don't exist here, just the same question, what types of businesses are we, maybe it's the feed and fertilizer side, you guys see this, what types of products are we bringing into our region, and not international, but even within the country, what products are we bringing into our region that we could be producing here, and on the output side too, what businesses could we maybe bring to our region that don't exist? And I'm thinking more from our economic development side of how can we help grow those businesses that are here, or attract the businesses that make the most sense for this industry.
I'll start.
Yeah.
Small poultry operations. I mean, I'm so glad you're here because the conversation had to start somewhere, and this is the place where it started. So poultry operations, small poultry operations, I mean, there are 3 or 4 major, they're big, not big feed mills, but feed mills in southwest Wisconsin and eastern Minnesota that supply, I don't know how many farms, small poultry farms. And then I didn't even talk about Cashton. He's a major player in the market up there. And he's probably, maybe that's the poultry manure that came down here because he's got a lot of it. But if we start small and if we have a conversation and we start small, I would say poultry. For me, I buy a lot of corn and soybeans in Illinois, but it doesn't go anywhere here. It goes out of the state. It can go to Wisconsin, it can go to Pennsylvania. Most Illinois corn goes east, because that's really where the demand is, or the biggest demand. But there's also, like you were saying earlier, these distilleries. I'm getting calls like all the time for small quantities of organic grains for somebody that's starting craft beer, or they want to make vodka or something. So those are also opportunities, but the problem is they're starting small and they want bagged product instead of a full truckload. So, anybody else?
Something I wanted to say too in regards to that supply, and I know a lot of you guys probably in the wee hours of the morning are like me, you got a yellow notebook and a calculator and are figuring out whatever your next venture is going to be. I wanted to put out there in this conversation that we have, when you're looking at a chicken, like a 5.5 pound broiler, you're looking from a grain input on that. Call it 11 pounds of grain that went into that bird. It's about it's getting below 2, 1.8, 1.85 is good conversion on broilers. They always joke when we get to 1 to 1, you'll really have something. I don't know if organic rations change that very much, but as you're figuring, you plug in 2 pounds of grain to produce a pound of chicken. And when you're looking at your corn crop and you're looking at that in terms of what could that mean in terms of chicken, 2/3 of that ration is corn as far as the calories, just for easy math. So you've got about 2/3 corn and a third bean meal in a poultry diet. It changes throughout the life cycle. Early on, there's a lot more protein, and it goes down as the bird gets older, and their protein requirements are reduced. But as you're planning this and figuring this, I think it would be interesting for each farmer that has an interest in converting, at the very least, their corn, as opposed to selling it as a cash crop, selling it as a product that's passed through a bird. Look at your corn crop and say, well, how many pounds of chicken could that mean? Even if I was buying in organic soybean meal as a concentrate and adding and grinding and mixing my own corn, what could that look like in total pounds of poultry? And is that something that I could put the extra piece of infrastructure on my farm, which would be a chicken house, to be able to justify that, and then benefit by getting the manure to fertilize that next year's corn crop? So that's it. That's what I wanted to put out there as far as when you're thinking about this in wee hours, those are the numbers you're going to need to figure out if this pencils out on your operation.
One I think maybe gets overlooked in the conversation of the supply chain, but could be a huge opportunity, especially for our region and given our manufacturing knowledge and background here. What about that implement side? I mean, Dirk showed us a picture of a pretty cool looking thing that you guys take it upon yourselves to innovate and create. Given that, what are some of the things we're even bringing into the region in terms of implements? What businesses could we support? I hear a lot of Europe, in Europe there's a lot of this machinery that exists, and we're bringing that in too.
Yeah. Well, the necessity to build that ourselves came more out of cost savings. We had about 30 cents to the dollar in that project versus if we would have bought it from a couple companies that manufacture it. But one thing that's been absolutely critical for our family and our operation and the value chain has honestly been Early Bird, and then Eric with Early Bird, and their division that helps organics, and having that support right here in our local area. I know there's a lot of other pockets that have organics, and they're sourcing stuff from all over the place, and I drive about 7 miles and I have everything I need to put an organic crop in the ground, and that is a huge benefit for our area, which has been valuable. But as far as equipment, we've got a neighbor, a friend that invented a cultivator sweep that it's kind of like row shut off on your planter. And if you come in at an angle to some point rows, every cultivator sweep lifts up individually. And that is something that we'll have on our cultivator for this year. It's, I think last year it was in beta, and this year it's in production. And so when we look at an organic farm, previously we'd look at say an 80-acre farm that had a waterway or 2 or 3 or 4 going through it. And if you would try to cultivate that, on the end rows you're always taking out so much crop. And where we don't have crop canopy, we get really great opportunities for weeds to come through. And then with this invention, now we can plant a farm straight through, and we can cultivate it straight through. It's kind of like pinpoint on a sprayer. And so that helps us look at farms that previously we were saying we would not farm organically, and that opens up that door to taking on that farm or transitioning it from conventional to organic.
Very cool. So yeah, I think, we'd be interested too, again, from the economic development side of what are those other, what's all that machinery? Because there's just another huge opportunity to start building up those types of companies that really merge our manufacturing and ag industries here in the region. Okay, I wanted to open it up to Q&A for everyone in the room, or even amongst yourselves. Does anybody out there have a question? I know you do. Yes? Oh.
Dirk, can you talk about what kind of response you've gotten from conventional farmers or even people who never even thought about organics?
Yeah, you bet. And I guess it's probably more region-based. In our area, specifically like right around Eureka, Congerville, Goodfield, there's just a tremendous amount of organics. It's not the norm, but I think people are starting to be more receptive of it. When we get further out in some of those, you say 20, 30 miles away, and if we're doing organics there, a lot of the neighbors, the first couple of years, they think you're nuts. And then when you go a couple of years and they realize that maybe when their dicamba beans are about as clean as your organic beans, they maybe start to take a little closer look at it. But it's really spurred a lot of great conversations. And I guess one thing that I've always appreciated about the organic community, it's a very close-knit group of people. And they're also very willing to share and learn, because I don't think any of us have organics figured out yet. And that was actually one of the things that attracted us the most to the organic community. And so when you have a conventional farmer approach you, and I always say conventional farming, people don't quite share as much information as organics. When they approach you with questions and you sit down and offer to teach them anything or share anything that you have with them, sometimes it catches them off guard, and then they're kind of interested. And we've had a couple neighbors that have watched before. We've had conversations, and then they might jump in and try it as well. And when we got started, we were that guy asking questions. We wanted to know a lot about it, and people took the time to explain it to us. So, Sarah, I don't know if I answered your question, but thanks.
I think also what I'm seeing in talking to some producers, just in the past week, I've talked to two that are not organic farming, but very interested, and we're kind of running through numbers and answering questions. Part of this is being driven, if you go back down the chain, back to the consumer, whether you believe in climate change or not, there's certainly an awareness of it and a lot of talk about it in the media and whatever. So even landlords are hearing about this, climate change, carbon credits, these things out there, and sometimes this is being driven by landlords and landowners saying, this is the direction we want our farm to go. And there's one guy in particular I'm working with that said he had not necessarily intended to go into organics, but his landlords or landowners really wanted him to take a look at it, and he has, and he loves it. But so there's definitely drivers as we hear about water quality. These things are just going to, honestly, the ag industry is under a lot of scrutiny, probably more the last few years than ever. And I think all those things together are going to continue to drive this awareness, even outside the farming community. And I think another thing that's contributing is guys like Derek and Garrett and these producers that are doing a really phenomenal job. We've all heard the jokes about the bins going up for foxtail seed and things like that, again, toward the organic farming. But, I think that's changed, and it is changing. And I think people are taking notice that you can no longer easily spot the organic fields like maybe you used to be able to. And so I think that's also helping the acceptance and the encouragement even of it. So,
I guess, I've gone to quite a few meetings, and I don't think, I'm always expecting a bigger crowd with the sort of declining conventional prices and so forth, but I'm curious with the amount of acres that are transitioning and coming into production, how that affects, on a bigger picture for Ryan and Barr maybe, what does it look like right now? Are we worried that we've got a lot of acres coming into production, it's gonna ruin prices, or
I'll just start and you can finish.
Go for it.
What you have to remember is that organics is growing. It's going to continue to grow. With it, there's going to be a lot of change, and this conference here is indicative of the willingness of everyone to have organics grow. I'm depending on the millennials. They're very media savvy, and they want better quality food. And they're the ones, that's the generation, I'm a baby boomer. We're the largest group of people in the world, right, or in the United States. So I have a lot of faith in our youth because they're the ones that are going to drive this organic, not just here in Illinois, but across the country. But are you asking about pricing? Is it going to affect pricing?
I guess kind of general outlook on.
You know what? We live in a capitalist society, thank God. And so we're always going to be, tested by the markets and weather and rumors that are out there. And I know that all the farmers would like to see $10 corn again. But what really hurt us was back when we were selling corn for $16, and we knew it wasn't sustainable. So then it kind of crashed and burned. And right now the corn price is down a little bit, like under $8, picked up off the farm. But we have a lot of animals that eat corn, a lot of poultry eat corn. It's 2/3, I didn't even know that, it's 2/3 of their diet. I mean, my goodness, so of course, yes, it's gonna grow.
I think I want to just add that too, that I think things like that are all the reasons we need to have conversations about that whole supply chain too, right? That we don't get stuck on just talking about growing it, but what are all of the businesses that are associated with this industry? It'll continue to grow, right? But how do we make it so that we're not, because if something does happen where all of a sudden the prices start to drop, and well then what have we done in our region throughout central Illinois to even diversify within that industry, right? So how can farmers and all of the stakeholders work together and not just work in your own bucket of production, but start reaching out? How do we work together to bring more of these companies here and grow them ourselves?
Yeah, and just to add to Barb's comments, so I'm an economist by training, and so that means I'm the bearer of bad news. Anytime I go out and talk to people, I don't know why they like to talk to me because I never say anything positive. And I was in Indiana last week. I think the last question somebody asked me, and they're like, well, if it's so bad, then why would people transition? It's like, no, what you don't understand is, compared to conventional, it's sunshines and rainbow. I mean, it's fantastic. You realize, even with any of the negative thing that I'm talking about, limitations and challenges to demand and the imports, and growth and producers, you're still profitable as an organic producer. There's still profits and revenues to be generated above cost as an organic producer. And the reason for that is demand. It is demand. What happened in the conventional sector is they lost sight of demand. They had biofuels, and then they had some revisions in China's policy. They had growth in Southeast Asia. And so from 2002 all the way through about 2014, 15, prices went up and up and up and up. And they thought corn could never fall back below $6 again. Demand stopped growing. We only eat so much food in this world. We don't really make that much more biofuel anymore. China, they started backing off imports before the tariffs even kicked in. They started pulling out of Latin America. We lost track of demand. That's what hurt conventional agriculture. And that's where organic has the advantage right now, is the demand side. We have the advantage because we sell something that means more than just calories in your tummy. It means value for farmers. It means sustainability of rural, I'm losing my words here, rural lifestyles. It means environmental benefits. There's a whole bundle of benefits that go with organic that build that demand side. And that's what will hurt organics eventually if we don't pay attention to it, is that demand side. We've got to make sure that we continue to translate those things to consumers and continue to grow. You know, I mentioned before, we're 3% of food sales in the U.S. That's nothing. The potential to continue to grow, even if U.S. consumers continue to eat at their current level, which will keep corn at $3.50 a bushel, because that's what we've got going on. Even if consumers continue to eat what they are now, the fact that we're 3%, we can grow by hundreds, you know, double for years, and still have room to grow, because we are still such a small aspect. So with all the bad things that we have to say about organic right now, the potential for long-term growth and sustained premiums and profitability in this industry are tremendous. So long as we continue to focus on demand and building those demand sides of that supply chain and translating the benefits to the consumer. That's really where I see the linchpin of the building those supply chains, especially locally, putting together those endpoints, the demand and the people who can move grain and move ag commodities to that demand, and connecting those back with farmers.
And I think right back down to your own personal operation. You know, for the last couple of years, I've just been mentioning to guys, as organic crop prices have been pretty strong, at least since I've been back, and I'm sure it used to be stronger, like you mentioned, but is to really dive into your numbers and understand your costs, your true costs, and then put together just a really comprehensive plan that maps out your path to productivity. And that can take sometimes 2 and 3 years advanced planning, which many people aren't used to doing. And I've told a few guys, you know, produce your organic corn like it's worth $5. You know, shoot for as if it's that way. Get that efficient. And then if it's any above that, that's great. But to hang your operation on $8, $9, $10, $11, $12 corn obviously is not sustainable either. So it's always looking for ways to be efficient with your nutrients. Use them wisely, use them carefully, deal with variability, balance your soils, balance your program, and be as efficient as possible. And then big price swings won't put you out of business. And hopefully you can still maintain profitability. Dave, I see you.
Yeah, ultimately, what do you think the price of organic corn will be when supply and demand come into balance?
Big question.
Definitely not me.
We don't know. You know, I think right now, say, talk like soybeans are break even somewhere around $16 a bushel. I don't know that we really know where corn break even is yet. Frankly, thinking about it that way is valuable, and it's also a little bit detrimental. It's an important question to ask because it kind of gives you an idea of how far the industry could grow, and also kind of where your long-term, you know, viability and your break-even point is for your on-farm profitability. But thinking of it in terms of one crop is a little counterproductive, because you have to think of it in terms of a rotation. It's not what is the break-even for corn, what is the break-even for soybean. It's what kind of rotation can I put in that creates a revenue stream over 4 or 5 years that allows me to be profitable. So it's not just a crop type of a perspective, which makes it even more complicated than conventional. Because like I said before, a conventional guy, you can go and look at the seed lot. What's the D's corn doing? Should I put in corn or should I do in soybeans this year? You have to think in 4 or 5 year increments. What is my rotation? What rotation should I be working towards, and how can I adjust that rotation as I go that keeps me profitable? So it's a really challenging question to ask.
Well, the second part of that question then, can the farmer of the future afford to be a producer of raw materials only? Or are we going to be forced to capture a significant part of the value adding and marketing value of the raw materials that we grow?
I mean, I think there will always be room for someone to be just an input provider. Whenever we talk about that 3% trying to grow that, quite frankly, you're not really gonna get to 10-15% unless you engage large-scale conventional producers, people like Purdue and Smithfield and Cargill and Bunge, people who are gonna want those inputs and they're gonna own the supply chain from that point on. It's irrational to think that you're going to be able to really get that far into consumer demand without engaging them. And frankly, a lot of the livestock growth that we've seen over the past few years has been because of them. So they're always going to be a part of that picture. And because they're always going to be a part of that picture, they're always going to be looking for a producer who will provide them inputs. I think what's important to keep in mind, or the important way to think about it is, it's not a matter of pushing them out of the game. It's allowing them not to own all the cards. You got to own the cards as an industry and then deal to them. They're going to be there, and they're going to be an important part of it. But you can't let them be the ones that set the rule and deal the game. You've got to keep that on your side of the fence.
Ron, do you think that organic farmers having a more conventional mindset of, I'm doing something different, but I'm still selling a commodity? I mean, is that a kind of a, like you said, you're an economist by training, I'm an evolutionary biologist and a Roman Catholic, so I live with a dichotomy in my life. But do you think that conventional mindsets in organic farming, might have spilled over, whereas, we don't necessarily think far enough down to that end consumer? I can make one heck of a ketchup popsicle, but I think my 4-year-old probably the only person to ever want one. It's like, if we need to produce, if we're producing this stuff, if we're producing an organic product, is it exactly, the product, the way we're producing it, the way the end customer wants it? Is that the mindset that we need, as Tori was asking about? What is the supporting businesses that are needed? Go out into the world and find those people who are already interfacing with the end customer. Is it sitting down with the grocery store that's actually having that final interaction with the customer and saying, what are you being asked for that you can't provide? Or where is that next segment in the constantly changing buying preferences that you're hearing more and more requests for? Because that is, just saying that something is organic, from the conversations that I have had with the buyers that are talking to the customers, or the interactions with the wholesalers at trade shows, it's beyond organic is the term that a lot of them come back to. And I know that kind of has been a bastardized term, that some people will say beyond organic just to get around the organic certification, but they're looking for a whole host of other things that go into that. So I think, in answer to Tori's original question, to get these additional supporting businesses in the conversation, whatever they may be, but they're the people who are interfacing with that end customer to know what is going to pull off of the farm. In regards to what Dave had asked, what is this supply and demand when they meet? What is that price going to be? Let's not necessarily focus on that. What are we going to create where there's this continual demand that is coming because there's a flexibility in our supply chain that allows us to take advantage of those changing buyer preferences? You don't want to just stick your finger in the wind and say, what are they going to want tomorrow? But you have to be willing to say, this is a changing environment in the consumer side, and their consumer mindset. And because of social media, those things can change quickly. How can we continue to capture each of those changes as the zeitgeist changes within the market? So, anyway.
Yeah, I think a lot of that answer comes to the fact that organic started off as hippie farmers in Vermont selling purple carrots and strange cheese. That's really what we came from. We didn't start off with upscale, innovative producers demanding our goods as inputs. We started off as small boutique producers who produced and sold into our local communities. So that footprint, that heritage, that's built into the DNA of organic. That's there. I think moving that around and spreading that approach, part of that is engaging those people who have been doing it since the 1980s and who were there before all this infrastructure existed, and talking to them how they went about doing it. One of the disadvantages that organic has is they don't have the past 40 years and billions of dollars of USDA research to show us and to build technologies and approaches and information for us. We're all kind of flying blind. We're all kind of in the woods together. But there's a lot of us now, and there's a lot of us that have been in it for a long time. And I think that's one of the best things that I've seen over the past few years is more of this kind of stuff, more farmer group meetings where you have networks of farmers who get together that share information and help each other build those chains, and they help share those past experiences. So, I mean, I think how you put those pieces together, I don't know. If I was smart enough to do that, I'd be making more money than I am now. But I do know that there are people out there that do know how to do this, and I do know that's where organic came from. And I think so long as we continue that the tradition going forward, and we make that a part of where we're going in the future, that is that's really where that building those local supply chains comes from.
I've got a question for Mr. Sullivan. You stated that you have a market for some of your chickens that come out of your processing facility. Do you market them? Do you just hand a phone number to whoever brings in the chicken, say, call here, or how does that work?
So the way that works is in a number of ways. We offer custom processing for people who have their own product they want to sell through their own network, whether it's through a farmer's market or an on-farm distribution. So that's one of the things that we do offer. What I'm speaking about today is a customer network that we have tapped into that has need for an organic product or has an interest in organic product. And so it would be something that we would be marketing, on the behalf of a grower network. So we are going to create a supply chain for this particular customer where there would be, multiple growers growing birds to fulfill the need, of that individual company. So no, it wouldn't be each grower having a relationship with the final customer. It would be us putting together an integrated approach to solving this customer's need by putting each of those pieces in place that we can ultimately create the product that they're looking for, to be able to offer to their end customer.
How close are you to being there?
Hopefully Friday. I mean, I'm going to be heading out to the East Coast on Friday to hopefully put the final touches on this deal and their need structure. And there's multiple parts to it, but this is one part of what they're looking for.
Any more questions or just comments out there? There's got to be one more. I've got time for one more. What about up here? Gonna get you talking now?
I have a quick question pointed towards Barb. Do you feel like there's more, or have you seen any growing interest in real specialty small grains? So I know some of the small brewers and different companies obviously are looking at even more unique ingredients. Do you feel like there's very much a market from Central Illinois farmers to raise that, where we actually only raise 5 acres or 10 acres of this specialty small grain for somebody?
Yeah, the ancient grains seem to be something that's becoming more and more popular, like Emmert and some other corn varieties too, like blue corn goes in for chips. There's a couple other varieties of ancient corn that I get called for, but they're highly specialized. And it's very difficult for me to find somebody that's already grown them, because usually they want it already. So, but I could probably, start a list and share it with people and say, this is something that could potentially be grown. I know that, I've talked a little bit about peas, yellow peas or green peas as a substitute for soybean meal, but I know several farmers have tried to grow peas and it's not good for Illinois. We have too much humidity and too much summer heat, and peas have to be, in Kansas, they have to be planted in March, and then they're harvested in June. So something like that would be good for a Kansas farmer, but ancient grains is always good. And wheat, nobody grew wheat in Illinois this year, or, either food or for feed. So I'm having, I have a lot of requests for wheat this year on the eastern portion of the United States, and the Kansas and the Missouri wheat just doesn't work economically. So every year there's something that we're short of.
I think it's a great question though, because I have people asking me how to get out of the 3-crop rotation to go to a 4, 5, 6 7 crop rotation, whatever. And I think these are questions that need to continually come up, and we need to keep probing these areas of additional crops. It's easy to get jealous of people in other areas that can raise 2 years of alfalfa and sell organic alfalfa to an organic dairy. We're just a little short on organic dairies in Woodford County. A little short. But just, I mean, I'm kind of always keeping my ears open for those because I have people asking, and I would love to work other crops into rotations for people or help them look at those. But we are a little deficient in that variety that we would love to have in other states and other regions have multiple cash crops they can grow. And at this, and I think that's another reason why we're having this conversation is to explore these other options and find out what works and what there's a demand for. So.
Lenora, business attraction, can you get us a dairy, organic dairy?
I wrote it down.
Lenora's
Jealous.
Okay. Yeah.
Are there any more questions out there? I had one last question to wrap it up, but yes.
Available for organic seed is sometimes a problem. Is there somewhere in the area that we can find this or get information for it? I know that sometimes you gotta order alfalfa seed, you gotta order it, late September, October in order to get it without treatment, if you want it that way.
I can't, Carrie will definitely answer on the corn and soybean side. Maybe I know some of the alfalfa that I'm selling to organic producers, you don't have to get it raw. There are OMRI listed inoculants that I have it inoculated with that's completely certified, and the supply is no problem at all. So if your certifier is requiring you to have certified organic grown seed, that's a whole different thing versus raw untreated seed or a non-organically grown seed that's been treated with an OMRI listed. So there's a slight difference there, but there's row crop seed that's certainly available, and like I said, Carrie here can definitely answer those for you better than I.
All right, my last question maybe to each of you, if you have an answer for it, is what is your ask as a participant in this supply chain, whether it's to an economic development organization that can do things like business assistance or business attraction, to a financial institution, to banks, to any of those support organizations. What's the very next crucial thing that those partners can help with, or maybe it's just even other farmers? What would you ask of either other farmers or those other stakeholders and partners to take this industry to that next step toward building a regional supply chain?
There's a few bankers in the room here, I think, so I guess my ask is that if anybody comes to you and wants to build about a bunch of chicken houses, just at least hear them out and just put a stamp on it that says go for it when they leave.
I mean, to kind of underscore that comment, in order for this thing to take off and to get legs and be able to run, like I had mentioned in my presentation, we have a processing plan. I think earlier they were talking about it. It's like having a $1 million combine sitting in the shed and only picking 10 acres of corn. When we're running at well below our operational capacity that we built it to run, it's just being underutilized. And so to keep this facility, and have it be a part of a larger puzzle piece, we do need to encourage folks to get involved. And that might be on the financial side, because we as farmers, we do need to have strong partnerships with our lenders, and lenders that are creative and are thoughtful and understand the time frames and idiosyncratic nature sometimes of organic farming and farming in general, and they don't always kind of follow the same trajectory as what an auto loan might be for a typical lending institution. So yes, getting at this point in the conversation, we need growers that would be willing to start entertaining a conversation about putting in either repurposing existing infrastructure for the production of poultry or for building possibly new construction to take advantage of ongoing opportunities that we see in the niche market poultry area. And to that effect, I think one of the things that we have taken a little bit from the larger integrators is that to be able to make these kind of long-term commitments financially for a grower to put in infrastructure, it requires some comfortability. And so part of what I am promoting and pushing with the conversations that we're having with the end customer is a fairly long-term contract, and to be able to give our growers the security to say, I can go out and borrow some money or use up a little bit of equity to build this necessary infrastructure and get the equipment to add this livestock component to our operation. I mean, they have to have that security that this isn't just a one-time, one-season thing. A poultry house is a major commitment. So where we're at in that conversation is pushing for between a 5 and a 6 year contract at this point with the customer. They say in the hog industry the contract is only as strong as the company, and I would totally agree with that. And I think one of the challenges we have from our lending institution is that we are a young company, and we have we come up against that same conversation with the growers. It's like, well, we're interested, but we'd want to wait and see how this whole thing goes. Well, we are at a point in this that we need something to kind of come about and have those early people start participating for this thing to go. I mean, that's really truly where it's at this point. So my takeaway would be, encouraging anybody who has an interest, and maybe it's an interest as on the financial side or as a grower, or it isn't even a commodity grower that sees the opportunity to add a poultry house, a poultry enterprise, as a way of bringing on next generation person or creating more space in their existing operation, to start a dialogue. And I'm happy to answer whatever questions. I'm by no means an expert, but I've learned a lot along this journey, and I'm still willing to learn and also hear people out about their challenges and their own fears and expectations about approaching a livestock enterprise like this. So that would be my ask.
Yeah, no, stealing Kevin's point, I think it comes down to financing. It comes down to financing and covering risk. If you were a small business owner here and you went to the bank to get a loan and you told them you'd be in the black within 5 years, they would be overjoyed. If you went to the bank as a farmer and said you're going to lose money for 5 years, they would laugh at you. That's basically one of the problems that the organic sector sees, is whenever you go for funding, they look at what's your chance of profitability this year. It's really a year-to-year type of a funding situation. And in terms of having tools to protect yourself against pricing downturns, there aren't very many tools, quite frankly. You can lock in, forward contracts that give you guaranteed price, which can lock in profitability, but then you lose any possibility of upside on price increases. And then even, we're looking past the farm. It comes back around like what Kevin was talking about. You need to have the facilities and the infrastructure put in to be able to have consumer markets for those things. And if there's not a strong footprint of organic farms there, lending facility or lending organizations, they don't want to give you capital to do it. So I think really having lending programs and financial institutions that come up with tools that work for organic operations, I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. Because I do think there's a huge undercapitalization within the organic industry. There's a lot more room for a lot more capital to come in for moving grain and for turning grain into value-added products.
Kevin, in listening to what you just said, how many houses are available for you now, and how many, like pie in the sky, how many do you need to keep you as active in your spot as you want to be?
So your question is how many houses do we need? It'd be easier to look at it in a square foot kind of context. With a facility like ours, we could see the need for around 200,000 square feet to operate our plant at the capacity that we have built it. So if you're looking at an average chicken program, if we're just talking straight chicken, you're looking at about a square foot per bird. And then you've got to look at a pipeline of birds that's coming every week. So you're talking every week you've got new flocks that are coming to maturity, and every day of the week you've got trucks arriving with birds that are ready for market. So in general, to answer your question, we need about 200,000 square feet under roof in order to run our plant at full capacity the way it is constructed currently. The needs that we have going into 2020, into the mid-2020 season, we have got needs on the waterfowl side. They take about 1.5 feet per bird, so a little bit more space. We have need in some of the game birds. We have some need for guinea fowl. We have also some need in the specialty broiler space, where there's the halal market has been a market where we have had a fairly large and outsized impact over the other specialty programs. Halal, for those you might not know, is the Islamic dietary certification. So the birds have to be killed in a specific way, and the birds have to be raised in a way where they're not being fed animal byproduct meal as a protein source, because I've yet to see anybody turn a darker shade of green than when an Arab guy found out his turkeys were eating pork blood as part of their finishing ration. So we need to be able to create those products. So knowing the need from the market, we have a variety of different growing opportunities to try to match with a grower's individualized the infrastructure they might already have, or what their budget is for building something new. But no matter what that is, we need to be able to create flow. So just building one house, if we come away with it from this meeting with like 2 people that say they want to build houses and that's all we have are those 2, it would be a very difficult project to finish, because we only have 2 weeks of production, or however we construct that. So it's an all or nothing proposal, because if you don't have enough production to utilize a flow of every week you've got new birds coming in, most of the end consumers aren't interested in a volatile market where you're having seasonal production, or even like just a production system where you're only getting birds every month or something along those lines. They want a fresh product that they can market to their very high-end customers. So we have to have enough growers participating where you can keep a perpetual flow coming into the plant week on week. Does that kind of answer what you're asking?
Was that 200,000 square feet a week?
No, total. 200,000 square feet to run the shackle space that we have. And that's just, again, these are just like the 2 pounds per pound. These are numbers that we can dive into a little bit deeper, but that's a metric that kind of helps people understand what the ask is, what we're trying to bring about. And so an average chicken house, today being built, are 30,000 square foot houses. Those are the big houses. For us, that's too big of a house for the type of plant we have. We would be dividing a house like that. If there was one available, we would be dividing it into 2 or 3 sections, and then bringing up smaller batches of birds each week through a facility like that.
All right. Well, I want to leave time for mixing and mingling, and feel free to ask more questions of our panel. One more huge thank you and round of applause for our panel and their participation.